Hello, everybody. So, I'm going to take a look at stanzas written in Dejection near Naples by Percy Bysshe Shelley. So, I'll start by taking a look at the context, and I think the context of this poem is very important, perhaps more important than any of the other poems in this collection. So, Percy Bysshe Shelley lived from 1792 until 1822. So one of the things you might notice is that his life was cut short early. He died when he was 29 years old. So he was one of the Romantic poets. Now, this is relevant to your analysis of the poem for a couple of different reasons. The Romantic poets, among many other things, were particularly interested in nature, the beauty of nature, the kind of introspection that nature allows, which we see in the poem. But also, the Romantics were very focused on the kind of problems of civilized society, the problems of modern life. And so I think both of these themes seem to come up in the poem. And with the problems of society, we seem to get a look into the kind of isolation that we can feel even in a busy, hectic modern world. So definitely try to refer to him being a Romantic poet and how that seems to inform his poetry. So his life was filled with tragedy, and at the time that he writes this poem, he's going through a very emotionally turbulent time that seems to be directly impacting on the poem that he writes. So, Percy Bysshe Shelley, his first wife, Harriet Westbrook, dies. She kills herself. And then his second wife is Mary Shelley, famously the author of Frankenstein. So, we want to put together a kind of short timeline that surrounds his writing of the poem. So in September 1818, his baby daughter, who's named Clara, dies. Of course, that's hugely upsetting. Now, part of the context in which she dies is that the family, which is Clara, Percy, and Mary, they travel to Venice where it's very hot in September, despite the fact that the family doctor says to them, you shouldn't travel there, it's too hot. They travel there anyway, and Clara ends up dying. Now, the death of baby Clara leads to a kind of breakup in the relationship of Percy and Mary, and they become estranged. They kind of fall apart, go on a break. Now, a couple of months later, their relationship is reconciled, and they decide that they're going to visit Naples together. So Percy and Mary take a visit to Naples, where they spend 3 months. Okay, so they're perhaps slightly warmer than it would have been in England over the winter, and they go to Naples for this 3 month period. Now, in this period of time, two things happen that are important. One is that he attempts to kill himself. He attempts suicide whilst he's there. Now, that tells you the kind of emotional state of mind that he might have been in. The second thing that's important is that whilst he's there in this 3 month period, he writes this poem. So the kind of close positioning of his attempted suicide and the writing of this poem tell us that the writer is in a suicidal state of mind as he's writing it, or at least close to the period of time in which he writes it. After the event of that 3 month visit, 3 years later, he drowns accidentally. And then 2 years later, this poem is posthumously published. But really, the three things that I would focus on, or the two things I would focus on, is one, the fact that he's a Romantic poet and his interest in nature and the social problems of modern life. And the second thing is that 3 month period of time in which he spent in Naples with his wife, Mary, and some of the details leading up to and including that period of time. Okay? So it's a long poem and you need to just take some time reading it. But looking at my screen, I think that we can broadly split the poem up into three sections, three themes. Most of the first two stanzas which I've highlighted in red, very much focus on the beauty of nature. They're all about the delights, the light fragility of nature. Then most of the rest of the poem talks about the speaker's own sense of disappointment with how their life has turned out. Only in the last few lines does the speaker kind of reflect on something that might seem to end the poem with a more cheerful note. Perhaps not. It's clearly quite a depressing poem, but maybe these last three lines are a conclusion by the speaker that provides a reason for optimism. And that conclusion seems to be that his life will end and he won't be mourned in this meaningful way, and he will be forgotten. But what will survive him is the beauty of nature, a sunny day. Those things will continue beyond his life. Before I look at 5 key quotes, one of the things I would draw your attention to is this regular rhyme scheme that occurs in all 5 of these stanzas. Now, rhyme can be used to create a sense of musicality, and I think perhaps what Shelley is trying to capture is the musicality of nature there. But let's jump into some quotes. I've picked 5 quotes that I would focus on, okay? So the first one is this quote: "The waves are dancing fast and bright, blue isles and snowy mountains, where the purple noon's transparent might." So you have this personification of the waves. The waves are dancing. Now, by personifying the waves, by engendering them with a character, they seem welcoming, they seem human, they seem accessible. But also dancing as an image, people tend to dance when they are happy or satisfied or content or in love. It's a positive thing that we do with our bodies. The adjectives fast and bright, for me, they're these kind of very short and plucky monosyllabic words that create a kind of lightness. There's that dental t at the end of the words, and it creates a sense of the light and gentle waves. It's very peaceful to me. The last thing is the use of colour imagery here. The blue isles. Now, blue is a calming colour, and that's created. And the snowy mountains, the white snow of the mountains perhaps creates a suggestion of purity and of calm and peace, I would suggest. So I think lots you can say about this quote. The next quote I'd talk about is this one: "The breath of the moist earth is light around its unexpanded buds." So the earth is personified here as having breath, like a human or an animal would, and that adds to the sense of it being welcoming. Breath is a kind of a very sort of fragile and gentle physical thing. It has no physical qualities. It's only a gas, and it's light, and it adds, I think, to that sense of those adjectives fast and bright being light. The phrase unexpanded buds. A bud is a flower that has not yet bloomed, and there's a sense for me of potential. Unexpanded buds. This image suggests potential life, potential growth, potential blossom to me. Moving on to the second stanza, I really zoom in on this quote. "I see the waves upon the shore, like light dissolved in star showers thrown." So firstly, this poem is very personal. It's centered around the speaker, and that's achieved through the multiple uses of the first person pronoun I. This poem is always I. It's very solipsistic in that sense, which means the speaker is very focused on themselves, seeing the world through their own eyes. They're very perhaps lonely. And I then talk about the simile, like light dissolved in star showers thrown. So this is a simile, and it uses a celestial image of stars, a star shower, perhaps shooting stars in the night sky. And that celestial image creates a sense of beauty but also of the unknown. You know, the stars and the sky are something that create a great sense of mystery. And I think there's a degree of that with nature here being presented as mysterious. But also, the image of light contains hope and is overall a positive image, I would suggest. Now, moving on to the second part of the poem, I would just talk about two things. Obviously, you can talk about more, and it's a long poem, but we want to pick out the best things. In this third stanza, the speaker begins to talk about all of the things they don't have, the disappointment in their life. And I want to talk about a structural technique that's being used here, and I think it's being used very well. Now, in this text that I've selected that's gold, it starts with the word alas and is paired with an exclamation mark. And that's showing the despair that the speaker feels. And the reason why they feel this despair is because of all the things they don't have. I have nor hope, nor health, nor peace, nor content, nor fame, nor power, nor love, nor leisure. And if you wanted to pick out a shorter quote, which I would advise you to do, I'd focus on that last line. Nor fame, nor power, nor love, nor leisure. Now, there's a technique being used here that's a high level technique for iGCSE. So, if you could include this, you'd be potentially getting good marks, which is the use of the technique polysyndeton. Now, polysyndeton, which is the opposite of the technique asyndeton, is where a poet will use multiple connecting words in a list. So, words like and, or, nor, when they don't just appear before the final item in the list, so fame, power, love, nor leisure, but they appear before each of the items within the list. This and this and this and this or this or this or this nor this nor this nor this. Now, this technique is called polysyndeton. This repetition of nor, and I think for me it highlights his feeling of emptiness. Now, the last quote that I'll focus on is this one. Weep away the life of care which I have borne and yet must bear. For me, the message is clear. He is depressed about his life. The verb weep shows his emotional state. And that word must, which is a modal verb, tells me that he thinks that this is inevitable, that this has to happen, that there's no way for him to escape this. He must bear this, he must put up with this. The last thing I'd talk about is the plosive alliteration in born and bear. B, it's a harsh sound. Plosive alliteration refers to the sounds P for papa and B for bravo. P and B, plosive alliteration. Born, bear. And it's a harsh sound that for me suggests his frustration. Okay, so I've gone through these quotes quite quickly because it's a longer poem and there is important context to know. But I think those 5 quotes plus that context gives us everything we need to know to write an excellent essay about this poem.